Today, I'm going to showcase the best all-around build for good survival and damage. While Striker will win out in raw damage, this Sunbreaker build still packs a punch while also surviving through hordes of enemies. In the background will be gameplay from a solo Master Duality. This build is tons of fun to play around with, and in the Master Dungeon, it actually gets pushed to the limit and you can really feel the benefits of the subclass that aren't normally necessary. So, to break down this Sunbreaker build, start off with picking your preference of super. In the gameplay you'll see some Flaming Maul, but I personally think Hammer of Soul is better overall. The instant on-cast Sunspot combined with the damage resistance from the super will easily save you some wipes, which is the only real purpose for your super in this build. Next up, throw on Rally Barricade, since it has the shortest cooldown, which will allow us to take advantage of our exotic of choice, which will be Laurelly Splendor. Grenade choice is preference, but fusion grenades feel like the best choice to me. They're easy to use and come back off cooldown quicker than you'll even need another one. Anything except for healing grenades and you'll be fine. For your melee, throwing hammer all the way. It's the entire engine of this build. Your combat mods and your regular mods all revolve around the idea that you're using throwing hammer to its fullest advantage. This thing is essentially like having a shotgun equipped that spawns ammo everywhere you shoot. It's incredibly strong and can power well engines very easily. Your first aspect will be Soul Invictus. This thing is too good to ever pass up. Healing, cooldown reduction, and a damage over time effect all in one. Hands down the best aspect. After that comes Roaring Flames. This takes your hammer and grenade and supercharges them with extra damage to effectively make your hammer into a mini nuke. Another great thing about this is it turns your uncharged melee attacks into flame charge punches, which will still proc any charged melee required mods or fragments. This can come in handy if you lose your hammer on accident. We'll speed through fragments real quick. Singeing to ensure you always have your class ability. Torches to make you radiant on charged melee hits. The uncharged flame punch from Roaring Flames will proc this. Solace to extend your radiant and restoration buffs. And Ashes just to add a little more scorch damage to your targets. Now to our exotics of choice, starting with armor. As I said already, we'll be using Laurelly Splendor, even though it's received a nerf. While the healing isn't as great as it used to be, and we'll be getting yet another nerf in the future, it's still an amazing tool. The ability to have a heal automatically procced when you need it is invaluable for situations you'll find yourself in when doing content like Master Dungeons. This also allows you to entirely ignore recovery as a stat, which means you'll be able to distribute your stats more freely. With this build you can choose any weapons you want or may need, since your core subclass build will be able to do the heavy lifting if required. You could even use double primary if you wanted, so you can have multiple champion modes, and you wouldn't be bothered by the lack of a special. In the video you'll see me using an unstoppable pulse rifle and a fusion rifle with reservoir burst. These are effectively just weapons being used as keys for the locks that the dungeon puts in our way, and can be replaced with whatever you need for the content you're doing. For our heavy, I strongly recommend Lament anytime that you can use it viably. Between our mod choices and the constant healing from both our Sunspots and Lament, you'll find it very effective. To make things easy, I use it for every encounter in Duality. Let's talk about stats for a moment. With the way this build works, you can completely ignore recovery, strength, and intellect. This leaves us with mobility, resilience, and discipline as giving any real benefit. Firstly, max resilience before you do anything else. If you have to throw all 5 resilience mod on to get this, then do it. It's the most important part of our build. Next, you can go for discipline if you have free slots after all the combat mods in the next section. But realistically you don't need discipline that badly since you have constant well spawning and Soul Invictus. Mobility is just meh. It helps a little since you're mainly walking around bonking, but it isn't worth chasing the stat. Now to the fun part of the build, the mods. You can have a good bit of flexibility with this build, but I'll go ahead and throw up the main mods I tend to use with this setup. Firstly, I use 3 copies of Phantomite. This buff will stack with Radiant to allow us to have massive damage on the bosses as long as we can get a well, which is really easy as a hammer throwing maniac. Next, Elemental Time Dilation to make our Phantomite mod stack for a duration buff. And lastly, melee well maker to spawn the wells constantly. If you wanted a little bit more survivability, you could swap out one of the Phantomite mods for a Well of Life mod, which would still benefit from elemental time dilation even if you only slot one. I don't find it necessary, but if you still find yourself dying, this can be the little bit extra you needed to keep you alive. For the leftover mod energy, like I said, max your resilience before spending any other mod energy. After that, starting from the helmet, hands-on is going to be doing a lot of work with this build since you melee almost everything. If you're attempting solo Master Duality, this is going to be incredibly helpful for the second encounter so that you can have a super for every time you go in the Nightmare realm. On our arms, impact induction is basically the same thing as hands-on but for grenade energy. It's a no-brainer and should be slotted if possible. For your chest mods, just stack resistant mods. I like to run concussive dampener and then the elemental resistance mod of the season, and then another mod covering whatever element the seasonal mod didn't have. So for example, right now that would be one void mod and thermal shock plating. Legs, just throw on the scavenger of your heavy, which in this case would be sword. Lastly, throw on bomber on your class item for even more grenade energy. That's the overall build. So how it works is incredibly simple. Bonk enemies to get radiant and restoration rolling, while also spawning a solar well. Get to 3 stacks of roaring flames so you can one-shot most enemies with the throwing hammer, and you'll have your buffed up lament to deal with anything else that needs a little bit more attention. For any bosses that have adds during the DPS phase, you can survive through everything they throw at you, which allows you to keep them alive on purpose. You can kill them one by one anytime you need to refresh Phantomite or Radiant, and they get right back to wailing on the boss. This makes bosses like Golrun incredibly easy and safe. Once you're confident with the build, you can even rush to the Scions in Keitel for an easy well to take advantage of damage buffs there too. Once you start using this build, it will be hard to see anything else as worth picking up besides something like Striker for its raw damage, or Arc Strider for the identical build with the same well engine that Sunbreaker has, with what is essentially infinite melee abilities also. I hope you enjoy this build as much as I do. Until the next one, see you out there.